Áudio e vídeo, 10 segundos.
Tô pronto. Ladies and gentlemen, in a few minutes we are going to start our second plenary day of the 34th General Assembly at OLACEFS. We would like to ask all of you to take your seats and prepare for the beginning of our session. We would like to ask that you put your devices, your electronic devices, in silent mode. If you would like to have access to simultaneous interpretation, we have headsets at the foyer. We have 39 for Portuguese, 24 for English, and 31 for Spanish. Please mind your favorite or preferred channels.
Autoridades presentes.
All of the present authorities, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to our second plenary day of the 34th General Assembly at OLACEFS. We're going to be gathering different SAIs. It's going to be a fruitful day. We would like to tell you that in order to have access to the simultaneous interpretation, we have headsets at the foyer. We have channels 39 for Portuguese, 24 for English, and 31 for Spanish. Mind your preferred channels. Now we're going to continue with our technical theme number 2, integration of internal control approaches in audit processes. We're going to have SAI Guatemala to lead it, and we invite the SAI Mexico representative, Maria Jose Franco Rodriguez. We would like to invite likewise the consultant of the Assistant Controller General's Office, Wesley David de Leon Soto. We would like to welcome the moderator and the speaker. You have the word, Ms. Maria Jose Franco Rodriguez. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. It's an honor for me to be here as the moderator of this panel. We're going to have the presentation of technical theme, integration of internal control approaches in audit processes. When we talk about that, the SAI that was in charge of it was the one in Guatemala, with the support of the SAI Mexico. So Mr. Soto, who is one of the advisors at SAI Guatemala, is going to tell us a little bit about that. We're going to invite him to speak. But first of all, I'd like to tell you about some data, about some information about Wesley. He's a public accountant. He works with public administration. He studied at Universidad de Galileo. He's a master in public control. He has a master's degree in public control and public auditing. And he's also being a certified international norm facilitator at each SAI, working with ISO 3700. He's been working with the Controller General's Office in Guatemala, focusing on public expenses. He works in a department that takes care of this department. He was a professor at the San Carlos University in the Economic Sciences course. And we would like to welcome him. Thank you, Wesley. You have the word. Good morning. It's a privilege for me to be with each one of you. I would like to be very acknowledging to the OLACEFS Assembly, which has allowed us to be present here today, for us to be able to share some findings in this from this technical theme. We're going to talk about the integration of internal control approaches in audit processes. We would like to thank the authorities in Guatemala. We would like to thank Frank Body for the opportunity of being here and they also send you their regards, their warm regards from Guatemala. We would like to convey, to show you, to present to you all of the information from this technical work. And to get started, as you can see, we're going to talk about this integration. It's an important focus point for us to be able to visualize what is internal control about, what it is about in auditing processes. All right, I just needed some help with the remote. Now I've got it. Okay.
Ok, ok, muy bien. Entonces, esta parte del...
All right, so this session, whenever we talk about the integration of the internal control approaches, well, this is one of the things that we would like to focus on. We know that it is important. We see the use of it every day in our daily work. There are different actions that each SAI carries out. And in the end, we can verify that. We can see that when we have everything integrated, we have diverse results. As you can see, this theme really moves us to take on action and work with SAIs in important ways during their mandate. It's true that we depend on until when we're going to be able to carry out certain actions. But everything has to be done in order to strengthen internal control. So we have to emphasize visualizing something preventive, something of a preventive nature. We also have to work with detection and correction. So those 3 points are very important: prevention, detection, and correction. We use those 3 pillars in our auditing processes. And the most important part of this theme is to come with integration. When we do these auditing processes, something important that we have to bear in mind, we have it is a report on human development, which was prepared in 23, from 23 to 24. And we could see from this report a latent concern in our countries. When it comes to human development, we see that our countries are quite still. They're not really progressing. And we see that when the situation is as such, we have to understand that our countries must be doing something to be in that situation. Maybe they are approving some budgets. They are probably working with some resources that are not going to be really appropriate. It's true that we need more resources, we need more funds in order to meet the requirements of people, first of all. And we see that those resources are not being directed to human development. And we see that there is this sort of a stranding, if you will. We are stranded when it comes to human development due to the lack of good application of our resources. We know that sometimes goods and services, products and services, they arrive, they get to the population in a very limited way. Sometimes we work with quotas, but still we can't reach everyone that needs to be reached. We need more evidence to be given to the auditor so he can actually have tangible data with which to work, and thus his work is going to actually get to the population. If it actually does in the end, eventually, we see that it's still going to have some limitations and difficulties. So all of that is really affecting the benefits that we can give communities. And as agreed upon according to our legal frameworks, which are provided by NTSI, we have to remember that the public sector auditing, it's interesting because when we think about the point that the NTSI defends, we have to remember that those points are really, they have been thought out, they have been brought to life because we really want to make a change in people's lives. So we have to bear that all in mind during our mandate. We have to evaluate the public resources, and they definitely have to make a difference in citizens' life. Effectively, we are trying to really fulfill all of those norms, but it's true that besides doing that, we have to go way beyond. We have to see how we can actually have a bearing or have an effect on individuals' lives. So we have to really be trustworthy. That's the point. We want society to really trust us. We really want them to trust those who are responsible for the public resources. So we have to think, and I have to emphasize that, we have to really deliberate on how to use those resources the best way possible. So people usually see the services or the products that we generate. We really want people to see that, and the fact that people will see that has to have an impact on those who are providing those services and products. They will thus think better. They will think twice before actually applying those resources and putting them into action. This is what an auditor does in those control institutions. This is what we have to this is what we have to be like. We can't be scared. We can't be fearful. We actually have to show our presence. We have to be visible and make sure that people understand that the use of resources is being done in a very appropriate way. We want people to understand that the control institutions are doing their work. And the SAIs demonstrate their importance. That's when they come into play. I'm just establishing a fundamental aspect of what we're all about. We really have to emphasize on those points about internal control. We know that we have those attributions, those tasks to do, to perform, and then we see that it is really important, and it's also in a continuous fashion. We can't stop. We have to respond in an appropriate way to the challenges that citizens face, to their expectations. We have to also think about different shareholders. We have to think about the emerging risks, the changing in environment. This is what auditing is all about. In these same norms, we as SAIs have to respond appropriately when we ourselves face those challenges too. This is something that we have in common with the population. We have to be willing to make changes in order to strengthen the auditing process. Maybe through technology. We have to use different resources, I'm sorry. We have to improve our auditing techniques for us to react better we want to respond better to people's needs and expectations. And then, if we have that all in mind, we're going to actually come up with important actions that will guide us towards those objectives. For example, we have ISSAA AI 200 in paragraph 36, SI 200 in paragraph 36 shows that the auditor needs to have a clear knowledge of the institution that is being audited. And I really believe that it is important because every action that we carry out, everything that we generate inside an SAI has to be with the purpose of informing the auditor. We really want that auditor to be well equipped to evaluate those institutions the best way possible. So this is exactly So this is exactly what we do. We have to work with data technology. We have to work in a timely fashion. For example, Costa Rica that which we mentioned yesterday, really advanced very well in their auditing processes. It's important to remember that we need to have clear knowledge in order to generate a process that will be including of our surroundings, applying applicable financial information. So we really have to consider the internal auditing procedures in order to identify and evaluate the risks of material nature. If we have all of that clarity, we're going to be able to visualize what we have to do in an auditing process. We know that this is an internal control system which counts on 5 important components. And in general, we have established this auditing environmental, this control environment. We also work with risks evaluation. We want to have oversight in order to have better control. We're going to talk about those 5 points later on. And once we talk about making a difference in people's lives, our legal framework, our norms, shows that we have to give importance or give priority, not just during the auditing processes, but later on too. We have to really prioritize and we have to focus on people's needs, people's challenges. This is something that has to follow us throughout the whole time. It's not just the moment we are working, but even after that, we have to consider and continue bearing in mind those challenges. It's very important for us to do that. When we visualize when we have the whole array of aspects together and integrated, this is going to give us a better view. We have to think about emerging risks and also the changing surrounding areas around those institutions. It's true that we can come up with a good plan, but we need to remember that the situation can change rapidly. Sometimes people might face a natural disaster, a significant political change, but the SAIs need to be ready for those changing scenarios. SAIs have to be conscious and aware of the expectations of the shareholders and respond appropriately to them in an opportune fashion and without compromising their independence. So this basis that our norms give us this is very important. There are some aspects that need to be viewed in a continuous way. So we see that there are many variables, right? And we have to respond to that rapidly and appropriately. And based on that, this technical theme, considering the whole background that I've given you, we really see that we have to defend something important. We have something to defend as auditing institutions. So we're going to show you how we can bear in mind those internal control points whenever we proceed with our auditing processes. And we have 3 points of focus. We have, as I said before, prevention, detection, and correction, as you can see on screen. Why is it important to bear that all in mind? Prevention is really important when we talk about previous actions that are supposed to be done by each SAI. They try to identify problems in anticipation whenever they use public resources and funds. They try to identify those problems before they actually arrive, before they actually happen. This is an important point. And once we have to keep that follow-up, if you will. It's not about working later or after everything is done and over with, but it's actually before. We want to avoid potential problems at certain moments. And we know that those problems can arrive at any time. They are very volatile aren't they? So this is an important pillar. We have to work preventively. Of course, as we can see on screen, it includes a previous oversight, an identification of deficiency in the internal control, and also corruption, which can happen at any time. Prevention can really help us prevent those corrupt and fraudulent acts. And then we're going to be working with transparency and accountability. This will really facilitate our cooperation with other institutions. It's true that we have to develop some capacities in our auditing teams. And of course, we also have to take advantage of technology to improve and to increase citizen participation in our auditing processes. So I have to say that prevention is probably one of the most important pillars. We have to avoid things that can materialize in very sudden, unexpected ways. In a study that we did, we had the participation of 26 auditing institutions. By the way, we would like to thank those institutions for their efforts. Thank you for answering our questions. And it was very interesting to see the different actions that they were doing. We tried to summarize the points that we could collect in each region. When we talk about prevention, we know that there are follow-ups for adjusting plannings. So planning is very important when we talk about prevention. We need counseling and advising too. We have technical meetings with internal auditors. We need to have interinstitutional cooperations. We need to elaborate informative files, documents, leaflets. We need to have trainings. We need a good diagnosis of the internal situation. We need to evaluate risks too. We have to promote transparency and public ethic. We have to evaluate system risks when we talk about internal control. We need to follow the different recommendations that are given us. That is also part of the prevention process. We need to have self-evaluating forms too, where we can answer questions and check if we are really following what we have to. And we need to work with public dialogues and interaction too. We need to organize congresses. For example, these meetings, such as the one we're having now, well, this is something that we've been trying to do to reach that, to actually attain that goal. The point is that each SAI are working with those preventive actions when it comes to their auditing processes. In Guatemala, I would like to tell you a bit about a mechanism to separate, to actually put this, to distinguish those points of focus, those focus points. As I told you, the first thing that we tried to do was to work with prevention. We had this program called Programa de Municipio Fiscalizado, as you can see on screen in blue, which means Controlled Municipality Program. So that was an engagement towards the prevention of potential problems, and also something that would foster citizen trust. Later on, we're going to talk about that in further details, but it came up from an idea of our Controller General. He felt the need to better visualize his tasks, and that was something that caught his eye. He thought about a certain citizen that didn't receive the appropriate health care, and then this auditor tried to help him, but still he failed. He wasn't able to have the doctor see him. So imagine that you are at a hospital, you need medical aid immediately, but you can't actually get there. You can't get it. And then in the end, he actually came clean and he said, "Oh, the auditor is here." Everybody noticed that the auditor was there, that the Auditor General was there. So everybody went to the person's aid. First of all, he did that undercover. He was just trying to help him to help that patient, but later on he said, look, I am the auditor. And then everybody helped. So what is happening? So everybody was really, they were not moved by the right reasons. So that's something that people really need to focus on. We need to improve the quality of municipal services for the citizen, in behalf of the citizen. So what do we have to do? We have to work on that improvement. It's not just an auditing process that we are doing by means of this program. We are working with prevention and monitoring. As you can see in the photo, we see food auditing. Sorry. We see if the food that is supposed to be delivered to a certain segment of public services is actually of high quality and is going to be delivered. This is a prevention action. We are just making sure that everything is according to the rules. We really want that existing auditing institution will perform the best, will deliver the best possible service. I think I've got a video. Let's see if I can play it to you. I want to show you that. This is going to be good just for you to understand and to see a little point about citizenship. Let's see if we can play the video. There are some important activities that were determined under the scope of prevention by means of this Municipio Fiscalizado program. It's not the same thing as just having anyone coming to the auditor's office and doing that on their own, reviewing the whole process. It's not that. It's something that is way better structured. We see that it's true that sometimes we lack some registers, an action register, but something that we notice, according to what PNUD has already stated, we know that those actions sometimes get to our audiences, to our populations, to our public in a limited way. In certain places, we see that in the contract, in the documentation, there are some things missing whenever we are trying to fill in those forms or that paperwork. We see that it's not really, it doesn't match what we see on paper, and what we see in reality is not really matching. So we have to mind that too. When we talk about hospitals, when we see the hospitals in the region, sometimes we see that they have food, but when we evaluate or audit the food, we see that they had already gone past the validity date. It was not in the best consuming conditions.
Okay, ahí está.
So let's see what we can see in this. Let's see something interesting in this video about that.
A ver si nos va a dejar el internet.
Recuérdese que nosotros lo enmarcamos mediante el acuerdo A-0.
So we did this, we came up with this agreement, and this agreement really shows us that we have to work in the follow-up and monitoring of the civil servants. We worked with important pillars. We have to really have a good perception of what is taking place. We work on different pillars. At the very beginning, when we were getting familiarized with the community, I got to know the families of the community, and I noticed that there were two buildings that had been built over 7 years before. They were used for health services, but they were closed. And thanks to the actions that we carried out, communities there today have an easier to access health service. We had the opportunity of improvement there is a school called Santa Cruz where students went to get schooled and educated. We talked to the headmasters of that school. We reached an agreement with them, and now they are working on the improvement of their syllabus, of their courses. I remember that one day there was a user that came to the local hospital and he congratulated me because he never thought that the Auditors General's office changed what was happening in their community. One of the nurses that worked there told me that nobody from that office came by to see the needs that they were facing, the challenges that they were trying to tackle. So we really changed our status quo, if you will. So we see that that same population today is impressed. They are mesmerized by what we are doing in the Auditor General's office. They see us as, they view us as friends now, as allies. As the monitor in this project, I really came closer to each person in the community, and I wanted them to see that the services can get to them. We just have to act the right way. So if you could see it, we see a summary of the auditing activities there. We were able to see this citizen perception that has been improved. Why? Because we tried to improve the quality of our services. We wanted the citizens to be aided, supported the best way possible by means of the public services that are available in the community. And according to our norms, we need the SAIs for that in order to know, in order for people to know that we are close. That's why we work with detection. This is the next pillar on which we work in order to facilitate the recommendation follow-up and also the identification of problems in an opportune way with the goal of mitigating losses. And also we don't want regulations to go unfulfilled. And we have to be very mindful of complaints by citizens. So we have to be very, very careful whenever people alert us of some problem. We have a very strong focus on detection. We really need to have an eye open, an open eye to what is going on. Maybe there might be a certain situation that will catch our eye, and then we have to act rapidly in our SAI. We have to check it, and we have to see if it's really worth our attention. Sometimes it's easier to ignore. Sometimes it's a minor issue that can be dealt with more easily, but some of the other things really need attention. We know that sometimes complaints are not based on real facts. We have to mind that too. Some complaints are false, if you will. They are not truthful. So we also have to analyze that. That's when detection comes into play. So we have to strengthen our control by means of that. These are some points that we have to focus on, as you can see on screen. We have to focus on those 9 points or bullet points. They are going to be very useful for all of us. Some institutions, they say, well, maybe we don't work with investigation, which is point 8. We don't work with specific investigations. Well, if you are lacking or if you are missing out on one of those points, you have to be mindful of that. Maybe you can work with a landline. You can work with some sort of communication channel where people can actually let you know what is happening around you. You can use academic studies on risk evaluation and assessment. You need to come up with internal control reports. You have to analyze the results of preventive programs. So it's a follow-up, isn't it? We started with prevention, and after we see the results of prevention, then we have to detect something. We have to work with the investigations, the specific investigations that I've already mentioned. And then we have to work with our massive database, which can also be used for that detection phase. That's what the SAIs can do. In Guatemala, for example, we have this, whenever we talk about detection, we really work on that very thoroughly. We have a quality department. We're going to talk about that too. Later on, we're going to have more information about it. And we see that by means of it, we can work with detection and prevention, so two of our main points, on a state level. And over there, we are divided in departments or states and municipalities. And then what we try to do is we try to get to the core of the population, which is the municipality. So we work from the inside to the outside. We go to the municipalities, then to the states, and then to the federation. And then we try to detect the existing problems. That's what the quality department does. It's a specialized work. This is not just an oversight or surveillance. It's something way more than that. It's we come really close to the population. This is what an auditor has to do. So we really have to detect something and alert the competent institutions so that they can do something about it. We have to alert those people. And then having that all in mind, we have to work with a multidisciplinary team. We have auditors, we have other professionals too. They will analyze that information, that situation that has been detected, and then we will see if there is a potential for that situation to earn or to get to a grander scope. Will we have to take it to court, for example? We'll have to present it before a judge. And then we're going to try to make it up for the ones that were injured or damaged due to that situation. We have another video that will show us how that can be illustrated. So let's see if we can play the video. Very good. The Controller General's Office has helped 50 auditors that work with verification in their premises, working with those different auditing institutions. We see that public resources are being well taken care of, we have checked if food has been well taken care of, and also we've been working with male health. For example, in a certain school, working with school food, our auditing team was analyzing the quality of the breakfast. And in a certain hospital, we were analyzing the quality of the food served to the patients and also their companions. So our objective was to see and detect some sort of irregularities in any institution that is submitted to the SAI. The objective is to have a full oversight on the services that are offered the population. It's called Prevención, Buena Gobernanza, Construyen Confianza. This is the objective of prevention and detection. One walks in tandem with the other. We call it prevention program, but it's actually connected to detection too. So we see that we have a continuous presence, always bearing in mind the needs of the citizens, and really checking out for any irregularities in the services that they deserve, that they are entitled to. Lastly, I'm going to tell you a bit about correction. What about that? The goal is to correct the detected problems that couldn't be prevented. Look at the connection. So we have to mitigate those problems' impact, and then we have to start a new prevention process. We don't want that problem to actually happen again. So whenever we identify a problem, detect a problem, we are going to correct it and prevent it from happening again. We have a certain procedure in each SAI where we are committed to really work on any relevant issue. This is the responsibility of the administration, of all of those who are in charge of the use of public resources. So how can we actually work on that compliance? You know that we do that by means of the auditing processes. For example, we work with the financial aspects, compliance, and also performance. We have auditing processes for each of those points. So how do we do that in a fuller way? So in the study that we had, all of the institutions that participated, the auditing institutions, we have to remember that they all are a part of it. We have to perform, or we have to focus on this correction. We have to work on this correction by means of recommendations. We have to follow recommendations that will help us correct actions such as omission, fraud, which can be generated by some agents, and we have to mind the good use of public resources. So how do we finish this technical theme? We see that those 3 points need to be connected. Do you remember? Prevention, detection, and correction. All of those actions, they have to be connected together. We need to have that integration. This is what internal control is all about. We need to focus on those 3 things. We have to bear in mind that principle. This is all part of our norms. And remember, the focus is to benefit society and the citizens. We know that sometimes we have some changes which can be quite certain. Nothing is too general. Some things are very specific. We have to really mind those specificities. Remember, the first one was prevention. We've already seen that. The second one was detection, which can't be away from those prevention actions. And we see that one follows the other. And then later on, we're going to correct arising problems. So bear those 3 things in mind, and everything is going to work out fine. So I would like to thank all of the SAIs that allowed us to furnish you with these contributions, with these presentations. It was very nice to present to you this technical theme. I really hope that all of us will be able to contribute towards the improvement of our system, the internal control system in each SAI. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Estimados,
All right, dear authorities, we would like to tell you that now we're going to have a coffee break, but we're not going to have a pause because we have another panelist present with us. Unfortunately, he's going to have he's going to have to fly. He's going to travel, so we will probably have to push the coffee break for later. So at this very moment, we're going to get started. Panel number 1. We're going to work with the strengthening of our institutions. So we have Guatemala again. And to moderate this panel, we would like to invite to the platform the director from Mexico. We have Maria Jose Franco Rodriguez. And we would also like to invite the consultant on the quality of the use of public resources. We have Wesley David de Leon Soto. We also invite we would like to invite the auditing director representative from SAI Guatemala. We have Juan Adrian Sosa Esteban. We would like to invite as well the external consultant for the strengthening of SAIs, a representative from Mexico, working with international parliament members in the fight against corruption, Justo Troncoso.
Y por último, invitamos también la...
And in the end, we also invite the subdirector of International Affairs from Panama, Melanie Ruiz. Before starting this panel, I would like to tell you that we're going to have a Q&A session, questions and answers at the end of this panel. We would like to welcome the moderator and also the panelists. Maria Jose Franco Rodriguez, we hand you the word. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning. Now we're going to have this chat. The goal is to share experiences and the best practices on prevention in the auditing processes. This is something that we work with in each SAI, in each of our supreme auditing institutions. So I'm going to introduce you to Melanie Ruiz, who is one of our representatives in Panama, and she's gone through a very important trajectory working with logistics and public management. She has an extensive experience in strategic solutions, operative oversight, team leading, which has really allowed us to occupy important positions in management, in administrative management. She has worked with the customs department in her country. She also works with the surveillance of the use of public resources, and she has all of those attributions working in the SAI Panama. She has a master's degree from Westminster's University, working with commercial engineering, and she has some certificates on auditing risks and risk analysis. We have Juan Adrian Sosa Esteban, a lawyer, notary, who has a master's degree in public administration. We're going to have those incredible speakers. By the way, Juan is a governmental auditor and a chief in the regional department taking care of audited municipalities, working with the Court of Accounts of Guatemala. With the Controller General's office in Guatemala. He's wrote many norms in compliance and also information security. I would like to also introduce you to Julio Lopez Troncoso, who is a public accountant, auditor, professor, an external consultant. He's a representative of the USA government in Mexico. He's worked with different auditing institutions, and he's been working in the fight against corruption. So we're going to hand it over to Melanie now. Some points about this focus, we're going to have that all shared with us here. So thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to begin with the key word for this presentation, which is prevention. Sometimes we have a reactive way of acting in our SAIs, but the word prevention is a strategic axis in risk uh, str- in risk assessment, not just anticipating as an SAI or an audit institution, but also as a government. We are a control body, and we can assess any risks that the government might be faced with. So, what does risk prevention mean? When preventing risks, we can mitigate vulnerabilities and guarantee more efficiency and transparency for our countries. A preventive focus boosts us to an informed decision-making stance and, as our colleague from Guatemala said, more integrity and continuous improvement. Prevention, once again, that is a key word, and it converts into a main pillar to consolidate institutions that are resilient and continuously in improvement. So, what are the impacts on our population as a result of preventive actions? While implementing preventive actions, this clearly impacts citizenship in a very direct and clear way. We have more safety since preventative actions reduce risks in several audit institution processes, and we can reach our objectives. There's also a greater quality in public services, given that all control institutions have as their focus to control, supervise, and oversee. This risk analysis, once it is applied to several institutions, promotes improvement and inequality and mitigates risk based on improvement opportunities in a way that we are able to consolidate our mission as a country. We have more trust in our institutions, given that the actions are proactive and not corrected afterwards at a later time. We also have the social and economic factor, and here I would like to say that there is a less political cost. We all have the political variable in each of our countries, so predicting and anticipating those risks increases citizen trust and ensures transparency, allowing this service provision to be of better quality. As a consequence, we have more participation, more information, meaning this conveys clear communication through our actions and involves community as a whole, strengthening all relationships with the institution. So, moving away from these informative parameters, I would like to prioritize a correction that not only improves our efficiency as a whole, but that might serve as an overview in how we conduct our work. I think it's important for us to address two things. First of all, we have a risk committee, and this committee tries to address all risks faced by different institutions, but these are not risks that do not affect the public sector. That's not what I mean. What I mean are, let's think about the risks that affect our image as a audit institution. What are the things that can be prevented and through which we could guarantee more efficiency and guarantee more public legitimacy and make our institution more robust. From that, arises what we have been talking about for a few days now, and we've been able to develop an internal platform that is available for all of the SAIs, and this platform is it's a platform that is integral to our SAI and the institutions that we oversee. In Panama, we have a number of institutes that use this platform, and this allows us to have control internally among different institutions. And of course, that helps us achieve sustainable results. So we ensure that the services and programs are consistent and reliable, not only in Panama's audit institutions, but throughout other bodies and in Panama as a whole. In that way, there's less risk, and that implies in more opportunities for improvements, given that we identify these risks, and that elevates the quality of our work. Having a preventative culture makes this continuous assessment of processes. It allows us to be able to identify risks, adjust according to the development of each of our countries' fiscal development, and so forth. So just to end what I was saying, among opportunities and risks, we have this table that presents the main categories, the main challenge that we have as a country, I believe, and of course we can share this with the different SAIs here today. We can see that in terms of organizational culture, the main challenge that we can face if we want to apply a preventative risk culture is resistance to change from a reactive culture to a proactive culture. But what is the main opportunity? It's the strengthening of our credibility and citizen transparency. If we look at resources and assessment, our main difficulty or challenge might be identifying the barrier to then reverse it and measure the problem, avoid it. As our opportunity, it's optimizing resources. And if that is not our main goal within the institutions, what is? We are those who have to determine mitigation in economic costs of government. I think this brings a huge impact to each country. And let's move on to technical and management. We see that one of the main challenges is the need to obtain robust data. Now with AI implementation and each department and institute's needs, this type of data and the training your employees is very important, and risk analysis allows us to see all this. We need trained people to identify the risks, and in terms of opportunity, we can see innovation in management and incorporation of predictive technologies. Risk analysis can bring us support in terms of guiding our actions. Final impact. The main challenge is overcoming the inertia of daily activities and prioritizing long term. The main opportunity is a long-term social impact and general well-being of the population. With this, we can reach a conclusion, which is the way SAI sees everything should be a state and country point of view. It should be apolitical and a consensus. Melanie, thank you very much. I'm going to grant the floor to Wesley so he can present his slides.
Bueno, muchas gracias, María José. Buenos días a todos nuevamente.
Thank you very much, Maria Jose. Thank you, everyone, once again. I am not going to extend myself very much, but I've already talked a bit, but I would like to talk about actions with a preventative approach. I understand that these are measures that will allow the identification of deficiencies in public resource use. We also consider opportune oversight and one that is anticipated and comes before the execution of public budget, government budget. We can also identify deficiencies in internal control, and at the same time, we can provide support and try to strengthen this system, generate solid institutions before situations. We know that not everything is bad. Not everything is a penalty. Sometimes we simply need support from an oversight entity to be able to generate this dynamic within institutions. Sometimes there is a certain resistance due to the institute itself, but supporting them. This predictive approach will allow institutions to become even more robust. Lastly, I would like to say that we are going to prevent corruption through these measures, since we know, of course, that it does happen within institutions, but through presence and constant supervision and inspection, we believe that we can fight against this situation that may arise. So thank you very much, and let's continue. Thank you very much, Wesley. I will grant the floor to Gabriel. If you can talk a little bit about what's happening in Guatemala. Good morning. It is a pleasure to be here at this very important event. What I will say is that our SAI, through the administration of our head of the Court of Accounts, thought about 3 approaches. But addressing more specifically supervision as a mechanism for institutional strengthening, we understand that these inspection processes can contribute to the population, meaning to each person that is waiting for health services. They want to be well covered, the child that needs school materials, or the rural producer that needs fertilizers. And considering this, our Comptroller General approved Inspected Municipality. It's the name of our program. It's an initiative for the prevention and citizen engagement, citizen trust. The main focus here is to oversee all the main institutions in Guatemala And when we say all institutions, we mean the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health, the Public Prosecution Office, the legal branch institutions, the legal branch as a whole, the executive branch, administrative branch, everything. The first goal here is to verify compliance, and second, to verify performance. And what do we mean by that? Compliance is in the sense that all public servants must complete their workload. In Guatemala, one of the most important issues within budgeting are salaries. So we understand that we have to have a preventative approach in this sense, and that performance within roles and positions will be observed, and we'll be checking that each person complies with the manuals and guidelines of each institution. So for example, if a doctor is hired to work for a certain number of hours, then we need to understand and guarantee that this person is actually fulfilling the time they were hired for. So for example, from 7 a.m. to 12:30 p.m., we will be monitoring their absences and tardiness. And I'd like to say that we have practically 96% of coverage for this program. In 2024, we had 36% coverage. As of now, we have 96. And what does that mean? It means that out of 340 municipalities of Guatemala, we already have one monitor for each city. We also have other monitors in each one of the national hospitals. We have monitors that work around the clock from 7 a.m. to 2 p.m., from 2 p.m. to 8 p.m., from 8 p.m. to 1 a.m., and then 1 a.m. to 6 a.m. So monitoring can establish if public servants are in fact complying to the demands and requirements of their jobs. We can also see that we already have a 96% coverage in 2025, as was mentioned. The program has expanded, and we currently have over 1,000 supervisors. We have supervision technicians. We have lawyers. We have engineers. We have professionals from pedagogy and a number of fields. So I would like to say that Município Fiscalizado is an app. Therefore, using technology, we created this electronic platform. We conducted initial work to promote a connection between this app and Guatemalan citizens' national registration. Therefore, when a supervisor establishes and looks at whether this person is complying with their workload and with their requirements, you see the ID of the person, their photo, and that is of great assistance because we know that, for example, we have a few teachers in the United States and practically forgot about school as a total. They are teaching ghost classes. There are ghost workers, and technology truly helps to keep that in check. The platform has a facial recognition function where the monitors or supervisors, when arriving at the city, they log on to the system. And the system will tell that person that is being scanned what their tasks are. AI and the algorithm allow us to supervise all of this. All schools are covered, all hospitals, all institutions are already included. And the system is also related to data that we already have on record. And each public servant has to update their records on the first day of the year.
And we do that facial recognition for each employee. And of course, we have to make sure that they are clocking in. So this monitoring has really helped us come up with these percentages. And then we see some irregularities about the public servants or the civil servants' work. And then we have these percentages that gradually go down and down, which means that it's getting actually better because the irregularities are diminishing, right? They are decreasing. That's why we have to monitor the municipalities. And of course, we have to connect all of that to the different agents. For example, we have unions, we have employees unions connected to us, we have assistants, health assistance institutions connected to us too, and all of those can alert us. And all of them can help us with to detect some irregularities too. So Municipio Fiscalizado, this initiative, which means monitored municipality, counts on different devices or mechanisms in behalf of a better auditing system. We have this little school. I'm going to give you an example, an illustration. It's in Saquichilla. And these images can show us that there used to be a little classroom, and we could see some cracks on the wall. The floor tiles were breaking, and now we have monitors in each municipality. So we see that now we could detect those problems. Our monitor approached the headmaster in that school. They had a little conversation. They also involved the Ministry of Education, and then they got subsidies, grants to fix that problem. And now you can see this beautiful photo on the right. So we see that the problem is that there was no complaint. There was no formal complaint, but it actually has to come from ourselves. We are the ones who have to monitor. We have to actually see what is happening. It is up to us to detect irregularities, to detect problems. We know that our focus is to deliver a better service to our population. We know that our children are at risk if the situation is not corrected. So we have this monitoring that is done in hospitals. We also do it in health centers. We have these photos that show a hospital, state hospitals in Guatemala. And if you look closely, We have expired medications since 1997 that had been stored in bags, in recipients. And then we spoke to the representative of the Ministry of Health, and then we had a little chat about the suppliers, the companies that were the suppliers. We wanted to improve that situation for the Guatemala population. We know that delivering or serving the population with expired medication is definitely a problem of major importance. And then when the program started, we could really see that there were lots of people that were in expectation of those medications, of those products. People used to take a long time until a doctor could finally see that person, that patient. And then we saw that there was an improvement too, even in the waiting time. We saw that it got even better. So one thing leads to the other. We have another program, Nutriendo con Calidad, which means high quality food. And as we can see on the slides, on the left, in the beginning, we saw that the food was not great. Yeah, you can see that the banana is rotten. That banana is rotten. It was not just one banana, but most of the food was rotten. Some of the greens and vegetables had worms inside. Not nice. And then the auditor came to the authorities there, to the headmaster in this case, and then they had a conversation again. And then he said, well, it is probably about time that you change, or that you no longer serve children with those foods that are rotten. So we really have to change those products sometimes. We can't take it for granted. And if corrections are not carried out, if people don't correct, if the institutions don't correct those issues, well, we have to alert them. So we need to work together with quality institutions, quality inspection institutions. We have to take it to other levels in case there is a dismissal or negligence. And now we could see that the same applied not just to the bananas, but now we see that there was a change. Yeah, on the right, we can see that the tomatoes look way better, the fruits look way better too. So there were some good results from that. So we see that the monitor has. This is another point. Now it's about police stations that had no weapons. And we saw that sometimes that made the population be in a vulnerable state, that caused them to be in a vulnerable state. And then now we have a service that will allow police officers to have access to weapons for security and safety. Of course, we work with different areas. For example, we work with fertilizers in agriculture. We work with weapons for police officers. You see, so it's very broad. It's very extensive. We use AI to provide us with a personal or an individual identification number, and then we can actually have some data connected to that number. We see the people that the number indicates, and we see what the person has received, if the person has been benefited. The problem is that actually it was good to detect this problem. We saw that because of those numbers, we see that people that had already died were receiving some benefits, some assistance. So it's important to have AI to help us out with that control, to really keep an eye on the people that should be receiving that aid. So all of that data will contribute to our auditing processes. That's how we do our work in those sectors. So we see that it's a very sectorial work, isn't it? So many different areas. We have thousands of programs today where we distribute food in a certain institution, for a certain institution. Then we send our auditors. We also have the General Controller's office to make sure that that is being done in a timely fashion and also with high quality. We know that this is going to benefit all of the Guatemalan people. Children over there receive things in time. So they receive whatever they need at the beginning of their school year, not at the end. Of course, I'm not talking about food. We know that we're talking about maybe uniforms, clothes, other materials that can be used too during the year, the school year. Of course, we also work with hygiene products too, such as soap, chlorine, and etc. How do we apply all of that in our municipalities? Well, we have to work with the Controller General's office. We have a specific team, a team of engineers that oversees the activities of our colleagues. If you see, we have some controlling programs that we have in different municipalities. Those are the green spots that you can see, the green pins on the screen. And then we can connect those pins with by means of a route, through a route, an itinerary. So our team does that work. We try to connect the different spots of that map. We try to connect it all in order to create a network. We want the program to operate on a grid. We really want it to be working in a very orderly fashion too. So by means of this program, Municipio Fiscalizado, we are trying to work with prevention. In that regard, all of the monitors that work with us, they can't sanction, of course. So whenever they detect some sort of irregularity in internal control, when they realize that there is something wrong, what will they do? They will go to department control, and the auditors there are going to do the correction part. Thank you very much for your attention. This is how we do our work. Now I'm going to hand it over to Julio. Good morning. Good morning, Latin American and Caribbean friends, people who speak Spanish, Portuguese. I would like Mr. Colmenares and also Dr. Eva from Mexico for having invited me for this important event. I would also like to thank the Controller General's office in Guatemala. So let's talk about the integrated framework for internal control. And whenever we work with public financial resources or public finance, so there is a certain organizational structure that needs to be followed. And we have three important auditing departments. We have to work with compliance, financial compliance, and also performance and expenses. So we have a special development audit, and that is all in accord with our norms. We have to oversee the internal controls, also research and investigation in different institutions. We have to make sure that there is an accomplishment or a compliance, a fulfillment, if you will, an observance of all of the internal norms. We also have to fight corruption and work towards transparency and accountability We don't want that to infest the public sector. We don't want corruption to be a part of it. We have to know how to manage federal money in a good way. And we know that that's a responsibility that is that should be taken on by public authorities. We have individuals that also need to be mindful of their responsibility. They need to verify the effectiveness and efficiency of their own operations. We also have to mind financial defamation. We really need to safeguard ourselves from that. We really have to mind this financial aspect of auditing. We have to oversee the practice of tests and administrative procedures. And also, the institutions need to go through an internal control in order to see if they are doing the work correctly, in order to also guarantee that the resources are being used the right way. All of the auditing institutions also need to be trained and educated when it comes to knowing how to proceed with internal control processes, and that is a fulfillment of one of our laws. We really have to mind those specific attributions that were designed for special auditors that will take care of the internal control into each of the audited institutions. This is part of the SAI's practice. This is connected to international compliance. We have to work with planning phases, analyzing criteria that is connected to internal control that will contribute to the effectiveness of that auditing. We have to check the integrity of the audited institutions. We have to see the current legislation. That's why legislation is so important. By means of the teams with which they work, they will have a detailed view and see how they can apply all of the laws and regulations to each of the audited institutions. That will ensure the continuation of the legal framework. In 2014, we published an integral framework of internal control. It's based on our Green Book. We had a group of superior or supreme auditors that really helped us out with that. They helped us with monitoring, and then on the 20th of November 2014, we had a special meeting where we established a model or a standard of internal control that was to be adopted and used in all of the institutions in different levels: national, regional, and also municipal. In 2016, we also published an agreement that helps us out. It's a manual for the internal control. It was applied on a federal level, and also it was applied to all of the normative institutions, and we had some criteria for internal control. All of the institutions have to observe it to carry out a good service. Some other disposition, some other points of this manual and also guidelines are about doing an analysis. We have a national bank committee that is responsible for that too. So the financial aspects of it are also very important. We had a previous study on internal control. We have a group of audited and auditing institutions, and it is considered by the Federation that this control has a double-fold objective. It really has the goal of studying the root of all sorts of irregularities, which will definitely improve the functioning of all of the institutions that are connected to this work. We really need to focus on the NTSI guidelines. There are many norms that need to be observed by SAIs, by all of the SAIs. So we have this previous study that shows how this project should be carried out. And there are many mechanisms that will allow us to understand what needs to be applied in internal control.
The project, the operations, the internal control systems, what the responsibility is, the commitments within the methodology and in the management of risks. Procedures, flows, administrative flows, supervisory mechanisms have allowed us to establish this audit planning on internal control.
Sí, para concluir, quiero manifestar que la experiencia
To end, I would like to say that Mexico's Audit Institute experience shows that internal audits not only contribute to maintaining the internal normative status, but it also prevents mistakes and errors by public management. And this approach favors an approach that is more favorable in terms of citizen trust.
Muchísimas gracias. Bueno, con esta
Thank you very much. With this participation, we end our moment here, but I'd like to ask you something. Why do you think it's important to have a predictive approach in oversight, and especially what is the main benefit that your SAI has felt? I would like to ask you to provide a small reflection in regard to this question.
Pues el enfoque preventivo nos permite
Well, a preventive approach allows us to better assess and prevent risks. I don't believe that SAIs are simply here to audit and inspect and to render accounts. That fear from citizens and institutions that all we do is look at accounts and accountability, that's not it. What we look at is we also look at processes. Of course, we do render accounts, we do have other services in favor of the citizen, but in general, we look at everything complying with the government, with the well-being of citizens, and I think that is the main advantage for us, is to have a more humane approach and a more proactive approach in favor of our citizens and population. Wesley? Well, I think we can better understand citizenship and the stakeholders. Those who are interested in really understanding the role of our institutions.
Ejecutan el gasto.
And we can perform a true control before institutions that execute the public budget, not as an institution that punishes, but as an entity that supports and guides without losing independence and autonomy, and helping to generate solid and strengthened institutions to provide services for citizens. Thank you very much, Wesley. Thank you very much, Adrian. Well, using prevention in our experience, brings more benefits to the population, because the programs promoted by each ministry, by each secretariat,
fortuna y tal como se
reach the population the way they should, opportunely, within the budgets. I also believe that this approach strengthens our internal controls. And as a reflection of that, it allows institutions to regain credibility before the population. I believe that audit institutions are here to help society see institutes in a different way through better eyes. Our Comptroller General's slogan is prevention and good governance. Build trust. So I believe that using this preventative approach within all the operations that are executed will contribute to strengthening what we represent. Thank you so much, Julio. Yeah, I remember that 8 years ago, our Comptroller General was a candidate as an auditor of the Federation. He presented his approach, and at the time it would be a preventative one. I believe that this approach is very positive, that it contributes to transparency, to efficiency, and as much as it is very true that Lima's declaration states that the role of our control institutions, I believe that this approach is incredibly important to the proper use of the system and for citizenship as a whole. Thank you very much, Julio. So, of course, respectfully, what is for us to decide? What can we do to generate these impacts? The programs that you presented from Panama, from the other countries, this comes so close to citizens. This reels them in. There is no way to reach people best than through education and supervising that service. So I believe that by supervising this, you drop costs. And in the end, prevention as a whole is much better than penalizing, because penalizing costs a lot more in terms of state resources than being a step ahead. So therefore, this is very important. I actually made up some time to be able to come back with the second panel in a few minutes. So thank you very much.
Agradecemos a todos los participantes.
Thank you very much to all our panelists.
En este momento,
right now we will begin our second panel, which is detection actions in the oversight process, coordinated by the Court of Accounts of Guatemala. To moderate this panel, I call on the Multilateral Relations Director of Mexico, Maria Jose Franco Rodriguez, to take part in this panel. I would also like to call on Guatemala's SAI Auditor, Luis Sanchez Estrada. we also have the honor of calling to the stage the Comptroller General of Chile, Mrs. Dorothy Perez Gutierrez.
Por último, invitamos al escenario al gerente senior.
And last but not least, we would like to call the Senior Manager of SAI Professionals relevant to the initiative of Mr. Sebastian Reis.
Antes de comenzar el panel 2,
Before we begin our second panel, we would like to inform those here that we will have time for questions and answers at the end. We welcome the panelists and our moderator for this session with the floor, Mrs. Rodriguez. Thank you very much. Well, the panelists need no presentation really, but I am going to talk about each of their trajectories. First, our Controller General of Chile, Mrs. Dorothy Gutierrez. She is a lawyer with a degree through the University of Chile, with a master's in management and control through the Valparaiso Catholic University. She also has a diploma in public policies. She has 3 mentions: economic regulations, public services, and environment from the Pontifical University of Chile. And she also holds a diploma in artificial intelligence through the same university with fraud detection and other complements. She takes part as a professor in different legal courses. She was part of the 3rd committee of the Housing, Urbanism, Public Works, and Transport Department, where she works in regulation, and she also worked as a lawyer in the Magallanes Regional Court of Accounts or Controllership. In 2016, she was Chief of Staff of the Federal Court of Accounts, and she was also Subcontroller of the Republic. She also occupied the position of Controller or Auditor, and in 2024, she was officially nominated as Chile's Federal Auditor General. We have Armando, who is an accountant with specialty in auditing through the University of Guatemala. He holds a master's in financial management, also in public policies from University of Galileo, Guatemala. He also holds a diploma in public management from the National Institution of Public Administration of Guatemala, and he also holds a master's, has over 30 years of experience in several administrative fields of Guatemala, several doctoral diplomas, and nowadays works in the Court of Accounts of Guatemala as the head of the technical department, has knowledge on good governance, transparency, and public policies. And last, I would like to present Sebastian, manager of the SAI Relevant Professionals Department. He is a performance auditor, university professor, consultant in audits, has over 20 years of experience in governance audits, development of capacities in Argentina's Federal Court of Accounts. He has been working since 2018 developing capacities within OLACEFS, and in this position he has several roles that are focused on institutional representation, management of initiatives on several themes to favor the development of SAIs within our LATAM and Caribbean region. In addition to that, he coordinates different initiatives that are geared towards governance and the relevance of SAIs, especially related to the professionalization of auditors. In the second panel, we are going to move away from preventative approach to talk about the impact on the population and target audience through institutional strengthening and the movement of building trust with citizens. And we're also going to talk about challenges and opportunities that were detected with this initiative. Now I'm going to grant the floor to our Chilean representative. Thank you very much to all the hosts for the excellent organization of this event. More specifically, when we talk about the actions, of course, not forgetting about the importance of preventative actions, but now we're talking about detection. We're talking about anomalies, about standards, patterns, and the way we detect is by using technology. We look at variations and possible fraud warnings. This is done automatically in an automated way.
Lo que hemos estado haciendo y traje un
And basically, we work with large databases, and that's what we've been doing. In May of this year, we decided to perform a specific cross-check, and we did this thinking about several elements that came up during the assembly. And what can we do for citizens to actually see the results of our work in a way that, of course, they're not going to understand in detail, because nobody is going to, no regular citizen is going to read an 150-page report. So we thought, let's put everything into one informative image, and we call this SICK. Everyone knows that circular letters are a classic way of providing information. And right here, we brought together all of this data. All of this data is official. They are not up for discussion. So we requested information and databases on a few topics. And we tried and attempted to structure this data using simple technology. I am not talking about AI here. We talk about this subject in a very clear language because we want to close the gap between us and the population. We want this to be fully accessible regardless of age, of social class, or anything else. We want the population to understand that we are working for them. And that's what we've talked about a lot in this assembly. How can we connect to our target audience? So right here in a single page, we are showing specific findings through a sample, which is the representation of an entire universe with a citizen approach, easy reading, cross-sectional, and we show everything that's happening in the 300 and something municipalities of Chile, but very objectively in a way that can be easily read and understood. And this approach of detecting and informing in an easy way, we have this example right here, SICK number 4. And it was conducted from November 22 to September 24. And what did we look at? The compliance with a very specific legislation that makes a lot of sense to our citizens, which is paying
cuestiones que están prohibidas por la ley. La ley
paying pensions to their minor children. Paying child support to their children. And The result of not paying this pension is to have their driver's license suspended. So it was requested that the data of all people that owed,
de pensión, todo. Le pedimos
that all those that owed child support be listed, and we compare that to the driver's license. We listed all of the names of these debtors, and that's very simple. We're not showing them how we do this all the time. So let's say in a certain municipality, a certain individual received their driver's license. We already had that traceability, but what we wanted to do was show people the results of their actions.
que el
So the use of that document has given us good results. We made sure that 70% of the municipalities, we saw that 70% of those municipalities kept on giving licenses. That was a problem, actually. We saw that more than 3,000 people were debtors, and still they got licenses. That was a problem too. So we made sure that those people be spotted. And we see that 482 of those licenses had been given to people that were related to civil servants in that municipality. Interesting. So when we crossed all of the information, we saw that impact. That was a problem. On the slide, we can see something that is quite simple. We see that it's technically beautiful. It's easy to understand, quite clear. We have hundreds of people that received their licenses in an illegal or irregular way. And the problem is that the municipalities were responsible for that. And worse yet, they were related to those people. Some of the employees were related to those people. We saw that there was an impact, which was quite significant. Later on, people, the population, and the press started noticing those irregularities. So we had CIC, or SIC number 9. That's what people were able to see. We had a cross-reference with a database. We reference-crossed it. We asked the police in Chile, and then we had a basis of all of the civil servants from 2023 to 2024. We had a list of all of them. And in our audits, we sometimes found out that some people had left work in an irregular way. There were some irregularities in that person's leave. So in very simple terms, that's what we wanted to see. We wanted to see the impact of those irregular leaves. We know that for 4 months in a row, we've been trying to trace that. And we've noticed that people are taking fewer and fewer leaves. So we see that that has been a positive impact. Sometimes people needed to leave the country for several reasons, or sometimes they needed... It's interesting because some people that were on a medical leave, they were going away. They were going out of the country. That was a problem that needed to be mitigated. We found out that 25,000 civil servants were traveling abroad, and they were justifying their absence with a medical leave. Isn't that absurd? So people were really indignant when they saw that. We really needed to review all of our leaves. We had a very short time to do that, but with the current technology, we can do that. It's been already said by our friends in Argentina, in Mexico. We use those same AI tools, and then we can actually trace all of those. So our point here, our focus, is to detect irregularities, and we want people to rest assured that we're going to take care of those irregularities. The time was between 2023 and 24, and then we checked 5 million medical leaves, and we crossed that with with some trips that were made by our civil servants, and we identified people that were doing that irregularly. So we have to work with that. with those summaries. So, for example, what are you doing abroad? Are you going out? Are you going abroad because you want to conclude your medical treatment? Maybe you need to travel to a different country in order to receive extra or further treatment. So we really needed to scan those cases. Of course, this is just a central piece of data. We also did that on a regional scale. So it was one finding after the other, one discovery after the other, and we wanted to show people that we cared. So we took that to the deputy's chamber. We exposed those discoveries, and then we saw that that had very good implications, good impact on the auditing institutions. We received grants and subsidies in order to perform a better work in that detection process. So that was good too. So we had a Senate meeting. Some parliament members told us to analyze those trips. For example, what about those people who went on a medical leave to have their holidays in Chile? We know that Chile is quite extensive. We have lots of holiday spots, so we reviewed that too. And how did we do that? What kinds of structured databases allow us to do those pieces of research? They were on a medical leave, but were they really ill? Were they really sick? Funny, yeah? The name of the name of our proposal is CIC, sick. It's funny because we saw that some people were found in casinos. And then that's the number that we have here. 13,286 civil servants were on a medical leave to be. They were on a medical leave, but they were actually in a casino, gambling. Wow. So imagine how indignant the population felt. People that go to work every day, they have to work in the private sector. They have to be committed to their work. And then they were really indignant. We had some more reference crossing. And then we saw people that actually did both things. They went gambling in casinos, and they also went abroad. So they did two things here, two very wrong things. Over 1,400 workers. Wow. So what I wanted to show you here in this presentation is the importance of our work. We have to detect those irregularities, those frauds, if you will. So we have to show the results of our findings to the population. So we have some articles that have been published, and we see the impact of the population on the population. The population themselves required us to do more auditing. So we see that the financial results and impact are also very expressive. We had a difference in 1 point in our GDP. We're talking about dozens of thousands of civil servants. So they do have an impact on our financial success. So this is my message. If you do your work thoroughly, you will see those discrepancies. You will see those mistakes, those irregularities. We have to take those initiatives to the private sector too. So it's a very simple thing that we can do. And the Social Security Oversight detected 80,000 employees, in the private sector that had done the same thing. So they could adopt our method in the private sector too. So having those frauds detected was was substantially important for our GDP. So my takeaway message is that our actions, put simply, they do lead to good results. We can actually influence other areas in administration to actually do something. Sometimes we try to convince them. Sometimes we try to shame the fraudulent agents. And having those studies, those initiatives, we see that we can present them with something that can be done. We can present our institutions to do something that can actually have a great benefit for the population. Thank you. Thank you very much, Auditor. This is such an interesting experience. Now we're going to hand it over to... We're going to have Dr. Sanchez. Oops, okay, a little microphone issue. Good morning. First of all, I'd like to thank God for allowing me to be here. It's so nice to be surrounded by incredible personalities, employees that have the goal of oversight in a nation. Yesterday I was reflecting, pondering over some important things. I took a look at all of you attending this meeting, and I was thinking about our responsibility, conveying trustworthiness, something that an employee, a civil servant, needs to convey, that those people really need to be a part of the transformation in their respective communities. That's why the population looks up to us. We really have to be change agents. We really have to make a change. We have to make the difference. We have to leave a good trail for those who are following us. I'm talking about myself because I am not that young anymore. So we have to leave the future generations with governance best practices. We really have to foster the observance of principles and good values. It has to go from up to the bottom, which means that employees and also chiefs and bosses and heads, they also have to observe the same principles. Whenever we think about doing things for the people, we know that this will lead to deep satisfaction. It is to no avail being part of a public position just for the money, just for the financial gain. No. We know that it's all about serving. Unfortunately, many people believe that they just they have to work for money. They don't serve their nation. They believe that it's all about the money. So I'm really touched to be here. From the very beginning of our assembly here in Fortaleza, I was able to see, we were able to study so many principles, different ways to do things. So I've got a little presentation for you. And I would like to show you that. I know that my fellow panelists have already mentioned some of the points, so I'm not going to be redundant and repeat the same thing over and over again. But I'd like to just go through some important points. We're going to talk about detection in auditing processes. I would just like a few minutes. We know that this is a high-level assembly, and when I was checking my CV, I was like, wow, do I have that many attributions? I've got a doctorate degree, a master's degree, 30 years of experience in this or that. Those titles mean nothing. What really means is our integrity. We have to think about the way we're acting. Is it really to any avail? Has this experience, this 30-year-long experience, been to any avail at all? Well, it depends on what I do with it. I have had the privilege since my youth to be working as an accountant. I've also worked with the municipal treasury. I started at 18. That was my first responsibility. So that was something grand. I started in the 70s, early 80s. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story. I'm just going to show you how different it was. When I worked at the treasury, the municipal treasury, and, well, I don't know if the same thing will happen in your countries, but let's talk about the interventions of the Controller General's office. Those interventions were not called audits. They were called account interventions. For example, I was the treasurer. Somebody asked me, "Well, are you the treasurer?" And then that person gave something to me. They showed me a gun. "Are you the treasurer?" And then I said, "Yes, I am." I was a bit scared. And then this person said, "You're not going to move until I finish, until I understand how the resources are being used. You're not going to move." Look at that. I was threatened. That was quite abusive, wasn't it? Intimidating. That's how things were done in the 70s and early 80s. I was reflecting on it because, there is a very specific reason for that. And I'm going to tell you which it is. We know that auditing has changed. It's no longer like that. I wasn't threatened into doing my service. We couldn't continue the same way. And this is the view that Dr. Franco Fuentes, with his team back in the day, and also Dr. Castellano back in the day, that's what they thought about. They knew that they needed to change. Auditors were supposed to be allies. It's enough. We've had enough of being scared, of being threatened. There you go. And the same happens with the people. Whenever an auditor comes, they feel threatened. So we really have to change that mindset. I'm going to read to you some words. We have to innovate with the heart. Innovar con el corazón. In Spanish, that is very important. So an auditor has to work from the very bottom. So we have to work with a simple soldier, and then we start scaling up. We go to the colonels, lieutenants, generals, etc. We have to change everything from its very essence, from bottom to top. We have a crisis in trustworthiness, in reliability. We see that the governments are no longer trusted by people. The institutions are not. The institutions are no longer trusted by the population. They really don't know how their resources are being managed. People don't trust the ones that are in charge of those public resources. They don't trust them. Why not? Because the results are they're nothing but short of what is expected. They don't show an interest in overseeing things so that the people's needs are met. I myself was very critical of the auditing institution's job and work, but now I have the privilege of being included there, being involved. I've been there for 3 years. I really needed to change the status quo, or the little chip that was in my head. So that's why I came up with this introduction for you, because in a very full way, these programs for detection, prevention, and correction, which really strengthen our work as auditors, we see that those are the things that really take us to a successful pathway. And with all of those initiatives and programs, which focus on prevention and detection and correction too, something that really caught my attention is that, well, when I first arrived in the controller's office, I saw the list of employees. There were over 4,000 over there, and to my surprise, I saw that only 20% of those employees, which also included institutions, I saw that only 20% of them had audits. They went through auditing processes. So the rest of the other 80% had never been visited by auditors. That really appalled me. Oops, just a second, I need some water. Okay. Very good. So only 20% of those were audited. The other 80 were not. And it was all connected to budgetary issues. Sometimes it was a millionaire issue, $1 million issue.
5 million. And when I asked why these entities have been executing funds for 10 years and the auditing institutions have never visited them, the reason provided was lack of resources.
Estos programas
So in summary, due to all of that, these preventative programs and detection programs have incremented the reach of our audit institution. We increased visits to a number of institutions and entities, cooperatives, associations, decentralized entities, using little resources. But as I mentioned, this one in specific had not been visited for 10 years. So multiply that by 5 million. That means that there are 50 million that were never supervised. And you can see a lack of attention, of care. There is a lack of inspection. And now with this detection program of Guatemala, together with the Municipio Fiscalizado, which is a preventative program, we have 200 and something municipalities in Guatemala. 325 municipalities were visited, meaning almost 100%. So the coverage has expanded. The presence of our auditing institutions has expanded as well. We are leaving the message that yes, you are being observed, you are being supervised, you will be visited, and that is already in place in Guatemala. Finally, I'd like to say that these programs
a la Contraloría de Cuentas.
bring credibility to our audit institutions, because a lot of people say, look, I have never received a visit. No one has ever been here. But today we know that public works are being supervised, hospitals, schools, everything that is under the responsibility of public administration is being overseen. We have an emblematic case, such as, for example, the acquisition of mattresses. And these mattresses had been requested. They wanted orthopedic mattresses so that, but based on the programs, what we observed through them was that the quality of the mattresses that were delivered were different from those that were acquired. They were not orthopedic and they were not of the same quality established for the procurement. And now through our presence, we have a complaint process. There has been a complaint opened about those who approved this acquisition. An acquisition in the amount of 30 million. So that is being looked into. I'd also like to share that these preventative programs, they work. Whenever we put our hearts into something and we have empathy. For example, when I visit a hospital and I see people in the corridors, in the hallways, they are not being provided services, they don't have hospital beds or clothes or gowns. Empathy. Unfortunately, my spouse has a terminal disease. And when she is consulted by the doctor, she is called in at 7 a.m. for treatment. And when she arrives at the hospital at 7 a.m., she is only called in to the actual treatment at 1 p.m. She cannot eat during this time that she is waiting because she cannot have eaten anything. And the saddest part is that she waits from 7 a.m. to 1 p.m. for the doctor. The doctor comes in, spends 5 minutes with her. And then we go on to another problem, which is the list of medications. For her to be able to receive this medication, she has to wait for another 4 hours. And when she receives this medication, and she comes to me, she says, "Look at everything they gave me. Why so many drugs? Why so much medication?" And I observed that they were handing out medications that weren't even on her medical request. So what's going on? Is this corruption? What is happening? The more they hand medications out, the more acquisitions the more procurements the hospital will have to go through. Is this a matter of medications being stolen by the people who work in the hospital? What is going on? So these programs allowed hospitals to improve the services provided, because the conclusion of everything is that services have to be of quality, they have to be opportune, we have to strengthen internal control of institutions, and we have to fight against corruption, which is the most important point of all here. I have a doctorate in public policies, and what we talked about the least when I was from the Court of the Counts was the compliance with public policies. There are so many issues that auditors, whether financial or not, need to know, but people usually don't, because they're not relating those to expenses. We have to know the reason for the existence of each public entity. Each entity has a specific purpose, be it education, be it health. Be it services for the elderly, for example. And as was said, our slogan is prevention and good governance builds trust. And that is what we need. We need trust in those that are overseeing. We need trust in those that are managing resources. And the quality department that is part of our audit institution, and that deals with the predictive program. In their last report, they brought 14,000 recommendations. They brought 14,000 recommendations for their employees. And after the recommendations, they provided the employees 30 days to put these recommendations in place. And it's wonderful to say that over 12,000 requests were met. This had such a positive effect. We strengthened internal controls, and of course, we boosted the quality of the services as well as their quantity. In the end, that's what we should have, results that actually have impact on the population. I'm not going to disconnect myself from technologies and etc., but will the costs with those investments impact the population? And that's what people expect of us. that we can meet their needs in an opportune way and provide quality services in the quantity needed. Thank you very much. Sebastián, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Va a ser de un nivel inferior a lo que hemos visto hasta ahora, tanto
What we are going to see now is, well, we have spoken about some specific cases and we know about social impact. Most certainly, I am going to place the same passion into my presentation as my colleague did. We're going to talk about detection, but also patterns. From Intesi's point of view in terms of internal controls, what are the contact points, the benefits, a few best practices. So can you help me out with my slides? In the meantime, I'd like to thank the Minister Oliveira, who is here with us from the Court of Accounts. My colleague, the Minister, thank you so much for being here. Controllers, authorities, thank you so much. Here we go. Let's talk about these subjects, the relevance of internal controls to external audits. All of those things you already know about. The IDI standards, but it's repetitive, but it's needed. Connection with the audit process according to the principles and standards of FIPP. Internal controls add value to a management system that has quality within the audit. The practical guide of SOAQM and the implementation of the SOAQM initiative in OLACEFS. These are things we promote not only to get to know the institution, but also to add value and to understand what they reflect in the objectives and challenges and so forth. Let's think about some practical cases so we can link them to this session. I will take the opportunity to thank everyone here for the invitation. And now going back to the origin of this discussion, the Declaration of Lima mentions the importance of internal control within inspections. And we can see a few situations like this. We know that we have to continue debating this. There is an artificial gap between external and internal audits, but we want to show you that Intesi's documents provides that internal controls are extremely important. We have ISI 100 that have to do with the fundamental principles of auditing in the public sector, always with a critical point of view in the person of the auditor. And there's certainly a lot of potential to support internal controls. Moving into specific audits, you know that at Intesi, we talk about 3 forms of audit: financial, performance, and the last that I will be talking about. Everything here is connected. In the case of financial audits, there is a very direct relationship between international standards and these, which are our parameters. We have standards that should be complied to. And of course, these are the sources for Intesi. We also have standards connected to performance and compliance auditing, as you can see here. And to better illustrate the relationship between internal and external control, we can talk about an example of compliance auditing. All of this in connection with the robustness of the proposal. We know that the degree of internal control support can vary. And we can also say that we can contribute in different ways based on internal control. On one hand, we want to talk about the risk of audits, meaning understanding the aggregated risk and the association between imminent risk and control risk using internal controls is very important. The risk of fraud, understanding how to prevent this, and also how to link this to a few initiatives that are anti-corruption and to prevent this risk of fraud. Not to mention the choice of significant fields to be audited, which is also very important. Defining objectives and the reach of the audit and internal controls. Understanding where internal controls can expand to helps us understand the objectives and procedures and etc. Understanding the entity as a whole is also crucial. I know I'm flying through these slides, but it's only due to our time restrictions.
Pero bueno,
These slides will be made available to you later on. But in terms of evidence, we have to have sufficient and appropriate, adequate evidence and to know to what extent the efficiency of these measures can be connected to these internal control procedures. We know that the more robust the system, the larger amount of evidence is needed. So, moving on to a more palpable theme, I'd like to talk about the development that INTESAI is coordinating through an initiative called SOAQM, which is a quality management system for audits. We have 14 control institutions, including one in Spain. And we can see different specific points of contact with internal control. And just to contextualize, I'd like to address this initiative. Basically, what we do is we modified ISI 140, which is the one related to quality, and quality control of audits. This is a quality management system for audits. And here we address the transition between the prior standards to the current ones. And this initiative is based on prevention. We work specifically in the development of a system that involves quality management that was defined based on objectives that the Control Institute defined for different activities. And basically, this is a very dynamic process that is founded on internal control. When we mention, for example, matters of auditing and what the quality goals are for a inspection agency, robustness and solidity are necessary and are crucial to this process. I don't want to be boring here, but let's talk about the changes in the standards. We are basically looking at something that is static and has to do with policy development. And it was a process that culminated in the definition of these policies connected to these requirements. It's a more dynamic process, and we have several entities, auditing institutes that take part in this system. And as we move toward the development of these policies and quality management in audits, you will see that a few aspects can be fine-tuned based on the understanding of what is taking place as a process.
Iniciativa para que se entienda de qué se trata.
This talks about the same initiative, just so you can understand a little bit better what we're talking about. This addresses the reasons for SAI participation in this initiative. On one hand, they have to comply with international standards. That is a basic requirement to participate. But of course, we want the main objective to be added value based on the review of the quality management, management requirements of each institute. We have a practical guide to help SAIs in this sense, and we really hope that it is useful. Here we have the 14 audit institutions that are part of the initiative. All of them, all of these SAIs can explore to what measure these internal controls of the institutions that promote audits can affect their quality management goals and that of other activities related to the audited entities.
We have some special studies, which was a very interesting process, and it's also in contact with any general control initiatives. Of course, I'm not going to talk about all of the benefits and risks that are encompassed in this when it comes to internal control, because you are well aware of the benefits that are connected to it. And you know the risks that you have to face. It's really important to know the institutions that are being audited. It's important to have a thorough understanding of what each institution is about. And it can also be an inspiration for the future, for future procedures. We know that having that done will give us ideas when it comes to assets and some other activities that can result from that. We really need to understand all of the requirements. Sometimes all of those requirements are not that clear, so we really have to understand the guidelines. This will help us with a better planning and better communication. And besides progressing in such issues, we know that this is not something that is unknown to any of you. Besides progressing, we are going to make sure that these initiatives, and I'm not going to take long, these initiatives really bring a lot of benefits to us and also to the population. Let's talk about detection for a second. We know that we have some 20 odd organizations that make up OLACEFS, and when we work thoroughly with detection, I know that sometimes some SAIs feel a bit nervous about detection, but actually I want to compliment you for your initiatives, for the good experiences that you've had. We've been witnesses of something very, very good. I think you've been focusing on detection. I've seen some things done in practice. We've seen, for example, how you've been growing in empathy with your communities, how complete and thorough and detailed your reports are. However, they're clean, and when it comes to excess of information, they are very simple to understand. We don't want to have like a 100-page long report. I remember that when I was working with the Federation, working with the use of resources during the COVID era, the COVID time, I remember we created different databases on vaccination. By the way, this is a recurring theme, and we noticed that we were able to, because we had all of that information available, we could detect problems in that process of guaranteeing that the population be vaccinated. We've also done that in something similar in Colombia. They've done an extensive, detailed work with prevention. Peru as well. The initiatives related to sustainable public purchases as well. So they've come up with a system related to public purchasing. All of those are mechanisms to identify red flags or problems. Chile uses some open data platforms that are very, very useful. There was this agreement with the Controller General's office in order to have this interchange of information using different institutions. So this extensive mandate has been very fruitful. It has been very important to collect and compile information. We see that's all been done in behalf of the citizens. For climate change, we've seen initiatives, the use of tools to detect, for example, red flags in the management of resources connected to it. That's what Colombia has done. So, wow, that has been very successful. Detection has been done. Prevention as well. For example, we saw examples of methods and devices that help us prevent fraudulent processes and corruption. About when it comes to sustainable goals, we also came up with good ideas. For example, we always talk about the 2030 agendas, and we know that we've been really working towards that. It can be a bit redundant, but we have to mind leadership. We really have to work on those SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. We've seen that it's been done. We really want to have reports that are technically acceptable and satisfactory, but we also want them to be accessible and easy to understand by the population. We want that to add up to the value that we have as an institution. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sebastian. One of the concluding points that I'd like to mention, well, it's very important to detect problems that are very delicate and sensitive and that can really affect the population. All of those analyses are indeed pertinent, and we do them every year. We know that it's important to have this interoperability between within the databases. This will help us identify little patterns, little red flags, and this will help us be alert against irregularities, and then we can focus on them. For example, our controller here crossed the information, medical information on medical leaves, and also trips that the civil servants were making. We see if someone is abusing the authorities or abusing the leaves, abusing their rights. We can have a medical leave, but not to go around and frolic around, not just to have fun. And we know that, for example, we can use all of that to detect ghost operations. Sometimes we see some irregularities connected to the emission of receipts. So we see that thanks to all of that data, we're able to detect how those companies, those ghost companies, generate receipts, and then we can see that those receipts, they will help us out find out who is acting in an irregular or fraudulent way, because we will see that those receipts lead nowhere. They're not connected to any service or product being offered. And we can work on that. We can work that out on different levels. And sometimes we have some problems with traceability. It's true. It's difficult to find. That's why we need to do a thorough work. And by means of those actions, we're able to detect those irregularities. So I would like to ask our controller to give us a little conclusion. Thank you. Gracias. Just to conclude, I would like to connect all of the points that we mentioned. To make things easier in the internal control, I've got to be frank and straightforward here, quite blunt. So I have to go to the core of the subject. When we control public institutions, when we see all of those thousands of civil servants operating in public administration institutions, well, we have to keep our eyes open. We were able to see that transversal reality. We know that that takes place in all the country. It also took place in the private sector. We really need to pay attention to those things. So I wanted to show you all of these points and arguments to show you that we need to really focus on our business. We are controlling institutions. For example, in Chile, we have some other processes too that we have to mind, but we see that we are more than just we don't focus on just one task. We have to connect different points, different factors that will help us do work in a grander scope. So we really need to focus on things that will have a significant impact, and then the population will actually get to know us as the Controller General's office. 100 years ago, people had no idea what we were about. They thought it was the elite, the civil servants, the government employees. There you go. But people didn't really know what we were about, and now they do. Now they know us. So we worked auditing different public institutions. We weren't able to audit all of them, but I really believe that we took to heart a problem that was very well known, that really bothered most Chileans, and we decided that in a short time, without a lot of investments, but just with the use of that database, to tackle it. We really wanted to show what the roots of the problem were, and that brought a lot of good results. That brought about lots of good results. That really showed a reality in our country, showing that sometimes we have deficiencies in the internal control operations. Sometimes we need to improve on the robust aspect of it. Sometimes we are weak. The oversight institutions also need to be reinforced. They need to be strengthened. I just gave you one example about medical leaves. This is connected to, we know that it can affect the whole region. We saw the financial impact that it had. Do you remember? We talked about the GDP. And then we also see that that can cause some sort of unrest in the population. So what do we have to do in the Controller General's office? We really have to make sure that everything is happening in a proper way. We could have worked on a quantity, but we're trying to work on quality. We really want to move people and create solutions. We want our partners to actually come up with solutions, and we want them to be closer to the population. And we know that the municipality is the first instance, governmental instance. That's what the population thinks about. It's the closer instance to the population. So it has to be exemplary. We really need to see how they are working with public safety and other aspects of public administration too. With CIC or SIC number 9, we required some information, and 90% of the ones interviewed didn't have a safety plan. And then we analyzed different aspects of safety and security. And then the next day, after having answered that survey, they called us and they said, oh, well, maybe we need to implement some changes. They were worried. They were not just scared or afraid of us as auditors, but they actually became aware of the need to make changes in behalf of the population. So we see that when we put together all of the elements that are in this equation, in this array of tools, we see that it's going to lead to good financial impact and also a change in conduct of our institutions and the institutions that the population looks up to. We saw that we had a lot fewer employees going on medical leaves, which means that now we were filtering that to truthful cases. When it comes to the financial impact, we've already mentioned that. We had an impact on the GDP. There was another one which was quite pertinent. People got to know us. So we saw that that was a chain reaction, and it was gradual and growing. But so we saw that the complaints also augmented. We saw that the number of complaints increased, that was also good because now people were aware. They had their eyes open to any sort of irregularity. So my last take is that those tools, that those technologies, that innovation, being connected with the population, by means of all of that, we're going to increase the value that the population gives us. And we're going to actually be real agents. We're going to change the view of people about us. And we're going to make sure that people will do their work. Thank you. Thank you very much, Controller. Luis Armando, please. Well, there is much to say, but I'm going to tell you about one of them, something that has really caused an impact in all of those detective and preventive programs. We had a presentation about those points before, and from the very planning phases, we were able to change our route in order to get to a common result. When I started working at the Controller General's office, I realized that sometimes we have the constitution, we have the legislation, we have to perform financial audits, we have to work on the financial compliance too. We have to do a lot of things. But I realized that there are different ways through which we can get to a certain goal. In Guatemala, for example, we've been working on that for months. Sometimes it takes months to finish too. The problem is that we are sometimes late. For example, sometimes our processes start in January, but we are only able to come to the problem months later. Why does it take so long? Sometimes the money has already been applied earlier during in the year, and then we're going to see lists of beneficiaries, lists of receipts. Sometimes technically everything is okay, but apparently we were not engaged in the work. Why not? Why is it taking 8 months, for example? Sometimes on paper, the product or the service has already been delivered, but we only show up to do that months later. There is a problem there. So we really have to collaborate. It's important to support and be supported. We really need to come up with a program. We really need to be in a consensus when it comes to the date of delivery of a certain product or service. That's what we've been demanded to do. So we really need to make sure that we deliver what we are supposed to. People are entitled to that. We have to check the quantities, we have to check the qualities. And then once we have verified and checked that, we can move forward to another phase. So we're going to have a group of auditors that are going to check the information to see if everything is truthful and reliable. They're going to analyze the evidence. If the evidence is valid, then they're going to have some recommendations. So you see, it's a whole process, isn't it? The problem is that sometimes those recommendations are not going to be observed. This can be a problem too. Then we're going to have a special audit to see if the delivery is being done. We see that the process is quite complex, isn't it? If it's a critical case, then we need to go to to resort to public complaints. So in the end, it's a long process, but we need to remember that sometimes that time is necessary. We need to put in time in order to benefit the population, but we need to make sure that those things are happening. This is going to have an impact on the uniforms of kids, the food that people receive in hospitals, the food that people are eating in public institutions, in hospitals and schools. We want teachers to benefit from our statistics, from our studies. by the way, talking about teachers, we had 40% of teachers that were missing class. It was not the students that were dodging, it was actually the teachers. Look at that. Why did that happen? Why were the teachers not going? There is something wrong in the system. Something is not happening. Sometimes we can check who the teachers are in our system, but they're not clocking in. And this is the problem. And then it's interesting because we can't transfer the identification of those teachers. So for example, if they want someone else to come and take their place, they can't do it, which is also a strength of our system. Unfortunately, we still have much to work. Many times we see some situations that are not satisfactory. That's why we need a more robust monitoring and control. Thank you, Sebastian.
Just to end, I'm thinking about 3 aspects. Regardless of insisting on standards, I believe there is a certain flexibility and a very broad space to generate incentives toward detection and prevention. And I'm thinking, for example, in the audit planning process, we need to understand what auditing is, what it is not. We know that there are mandates and others that have to be instilled automatically and mandatorily, but usually there is a certain flexibility to determine what audit is going to be completed and how. So I believe that this process that is mostly performed behind the stage, in the backstage of everything, should participate in this mapping of the social status, as was mentioned by our colleagues from Chile and Guatemala. So these are all issues that permeated the mapping that was promoted by the institution that reflects the social reality. This implies that there should not be an audit institution that is completely removed from reality, but one that is able to read the reality of society, of course, without denying its responsibilities. So going back to the standards for a moment, I do believe there is flexibility within them. That is my specialty, performance audits. And I'm sorry. When you who are auditing are able to work with performance audits, operational audits, etc., each country has their own nomenclature for this, but you work under the premise of efficiency. You take a look at to what extent public policy, once implemented, improved the baseline level that generated this public policy. So you look at the results of what was implemented. For example, children's mortality, for example. What are the results on that once a public policy is implemented? So what we're doing is answering fundamental questions. So as important as it is to understand if financial institutes are working appropriately, if everything is being complied with, what citizens really want to know is if this public policy was useful, did it improve the situation? And they want to understand the efficiency, the dimension of efficiency and that I talked about regarding public policies. There are a number of experiences here in regards to that, but I believe that we are advancing in all of this. So my final message would be, yes, let's follow the standards, but let's be flexible and let's consider our experience to be able to contribute within that. Thank you so much, Sebastian, Controller. and others, let's move on to the next activity. I thank you all.
De todos los participantes en este panel.
Thank you very much for the presence of all of those that took part in this panel. And now let's move on to the panel whose theme is initiatives. The theme will be coordinated by the World Bank, and to participate in the space on strengthening internal audit and internal control functions, we are going to invite Leonardo Nascimento, and with the floor, Mr. Leonardo Nascimento, welcome.
Obrigado. Bem, primeiramente,
First of all, good afternoon to everyone. We are here at the very beginning of the afternoon. I'd also like to thank OLACEFS for the invitation, and also the World Bank, the invitation to be here and talk about our experience regarding support to internal controls in Brazil. So the idea is to address our experience in this interaction with the Brazilian public administration in terms of strengthening internal controls, and we know that this was very well explored through the prior panels. We know the impacts are significant on external audits. Initially, I'm just going to talk about the themes that we are going to address. So we have PIFA, and for those who do not know it, it's an assessment methodology used by the World Bank for systems that are considered structuring systems in public administration. It talks a little bit about the main points within PIFA that are pertinent to internal controls. This interaction with external controls. We talk about the norms and standards that are being used in Brazil in terms of internal controls. And finally, what has been done regarding our challenge here in Brazil regarding strengthening the institutions. So before we dive into the methodology itself, it's always important for us to recall what the main role is. Why is the World Bank interested in issues on external audits, internal audits, external control, public finance management, etc.? Because we understand. I'll say that my job, for example, as a financial management analyst, is to assess risks. So when the World Bank grants financing and funding to a certain state or government, we have to assess risks. How will these resources be managed by these institutions? And when we assess risks, we look at the entire public finance framework of that state, of that country, to know if they are appropriate to ensure that World Bank resources will be applied according to what has been defined and agreed upon with the grant receiver. We have 7 risk factors: budget, accountability, that we assess, these among others. So within the country systems, we We use a generic term called country systems. And the more evolved they are, the smaller the risks that entail them. So this is the World Bank's role in terms of internal controls. Now, talking about PIFA, everything in the World Bank, I think for those who know the institution a little bit more, you're probably aware that we promote a number of measurements. So whatever we're not able to measure, we're not able to objectively evaluate. We are present in 189 countries across the world. So if we don't have a methodology that is comparable between countries, here in Latin America and Caribbean, for example, if a certain country has a higher risk than others regarding resource application, it's impossible for us to work. So this assessment and having this comparability makes everything easier. And that's why we have our measurement system. Now, still talking about public finance management. Resources have to be defined according to what was established in our agreement with the grant receiver, but we can see that 93% of countries, and here this assessment would only address Caribbean and Latin American countries. We can see that 93% of the countries incorporate these resources into public budget, including Brazil. So, a few other countries, a few countries do this, others simply account for what is coming in, and others have external audits that analyze these applications. But only 7% of countries do not control these external resources. And with that, when you insert within a public framework the resources from multilateral institutions, what you're doing is promoting the need for internal control by that country or that state to assure that the resources will be applied in the way that was defined in the agreement made. So the main point in PIFA is the reliability of budget, or budget reliability. So we go through external audit, internal audit, transparency of public finances, management of liabilities and assets, accountability and rendering of accounts, and external audit scrutiny. All of this to reach reliability. And within PIFA, we have a few items or pillars. We actually have pillars and dimensions and a few items that are evaluated within this methodology. So for those who do not know the methodology for each item evaluated within public finance management, we have metrics. So for example, if you consider that you are at the beginning of implementing internal control, a reflection of that will be not having an internal audit plan. If you don't have procedures for establishing internal audits, that means you are at the lower level of this assessment. So as you move on and you develop new procedures and you integrate new methodologies, this assessment graduates through the methodology until you eventually reach the top tier. And that is evaluated for each item within public finance management. These are ratings that are provided. So you have A plus, B plus, and so forth. A in this case is the top tier. And you have those below it, considering the requirements and criteria of the assessment. We have two specific dimensions on internal audits, actually on internal controls. internal controls of non-salary expenditures. We have a specific control for payment for payrolls of public servants, for example, and you have one that considers everything that is not wages payments is within this. And on the other, you have internal controls, which addresses exactly that. And just to bring you a few results, in 2022, we promoted a global evaluation of what we call the results of PIFA in countries that had already promoted its execution. And we observed, if you look to the right and you look at the two furthest bars to the right, you will see countries with World Bank participation. So the purple ones are the dark ones, dark purple ones in each region. Those respectively address internal controls and internal audits, the indicators that we just mentioned. And if you observe them, you'll see that regarding internal controls, there is a very favorable overview in each region. So the World Bank acts across the world. We have West Africa, East Africa, we have Northern Africa, and the Middle East. And within those evaluations, we also see LATAM and the Caribbean. So internal control is very well developed. It is a culture that we have, especially here in Latin America, that involves compliance, conformity, to assure that laws and regulations are being followed. And internal audits is the other item to the right of each of these. It's the lighter purple bar, and that regards internal auditing, which is less developed. So this was from 2024, and if you observe the two, you'll see that the less developed aspect is internal auditing. Why? Because it requires compliance with a few regulations and norms. It requires promoting an organizational culture. And we talk a lot about standards from INTESAI, from other institutes, but we don't talk enough about the internal audit standards. And based on that, we were able to see that the evaluation in the case of LATAM and the Caribbean, if we look at internal audit, you'll see that there's an average of 1 point something, where 4 is the highest score. And that shows us that internal audit in our region is not well advanced, or as well advanced as desired. And of course that implies in funding risks that are connected to these countries. So what are the key issues here? I talked a lot about results and indicators, but what does this internal control or internal audit indicator show? It shows, if we look at the international standards for audits, whether internal or external, we talk a lot about audit risks and what are the methodologies used to assess this, and what the work of the audits comprises. Within this PIFA evaluation, we analyze an ordered way of executing operations that is ethical, economic, efficient, and the application of laws and regulations that pertain to this matter, compliance with rendering of accounts, obligations, and protection of resources against losses and other financial damages. So basically, here you have an internal manual to guide you and the governmental agent in their actions. You have you have computer systems, you have a whole array of tools. An internal audit looks at how strong your internal controls are. You need internal audits to promote this assessment and to implement corrective actions that are needed to correct the course of your internal controls in a way to make them more efficient. In the efficacy assessment of internal controls, you see that an efficient internal control system is fundamental for all pillars of the public finance management.
So every well-developed public administration is going to have a huge number of norms, regulations, and systems to work with the efficacy of internal controls. An important issue that we still see that in some states in America, we see that many countries, many states still can't use the identification of a public good. There is no periodic verification of the existence of that good. So there is no identification. Sometimes it's quite random. We have a project called Progestão, where we actually have to control the public goods. So we are really trying to grant some subsidies to the Brazilian state so that they can have that. We have to operate with the risks, and this will have an impact on the management of our public finances. We really have benefits in adopting international norms. From the World Bank point of view, what is the most important interest? First of all, we have an alignment of best practices in the whole world. We know that the World Bank is present in 189 countries, so we need regulations to really understand how they are behaving. We really need to compare one country to their peers, one country to its peers, to see if they are really following the requirements on internal control by means of external auditing. So the better developed our systems, the fewer the risks are. So for example, is the World Bank similar to a regular bank? For example, whenever we see high risks, then we have to increase in the interests of a finance. That's what a normal bank, a regular bank does. The more risk, the more interest rate. No, it's different. Usually our financing is below the average, and we have standardized interest rates. But whenever we have high risk, we increase the cost of the projects, not the interests related to it. So when we have high risks, the World Bank is going to request some corrective actions to reduce and mitigate that risk. And those corrective and mitigating actions will also demand extra costs. For example, we are financing the purchase of machinery to work on a certain city's infrastructure. If we don't have a public assets control which is appropriate, we're going to have high risk. Maybe we can ask for a public asset system. Maybe we can use the resources of that project or the resources that can be used for that action. If we don't mitigate the risks, we're going to be requesting more and more measures to be implemented. So we see that the cost is going to be increased, even though the interest rate is not altered. When it comes to the government and control department, we have a clear diagnosis on the maturity of the internal audits. I've already told you that there are different dimensions that are being analyzed, but of course, we're talking about internal auditing and control. And then we can analyze its level of maturity when we follow the international norms. I can think about, we can talk about the Brazilian experience. We're going to mention a bit about that later on. But something that we know that the first step is to conduct a self-analysis based on on a on ISAN. I'm going to tell you about that too. We have to analyze our status quo. Where are we when it comes to the development of internal auditing? And from then on, we're going to come up with an action plan. And this action plan is going to be implemented. And at the end of its execution, we're going to have an internal audit which will be robust and well developed. This will allow governments to have this self-analysis. We can compare it to a blood test. So if you have symptoms of a certain disease, of course, you're going to go through a blood test to check what your health is like, how it's going. So whenever we do that, you know the best treatment, you know the best medication. The same works for the government. So those international norms will also help with the integration of management practices. We also going to have training for the civil servants involved in those processes. We're going to have a personalization or a customization of each governance. And now the third pillar is the society and citizens in general. Adopting international norms is going to give us more transparency, and people will be able to see what we're actually doing. We're going to be able to see and compare our municipalities or regions or countries to others in the surrounding area. So comparability is also something that we can attain when we adopt those norms. We can see what the situation is like in our country when compared to others. Now, speaking about the Brazilian context, well, the World Bank from 2007, it's been quite a while now, we've been strengthening and supporting internal audit and internal control in Brazil. Back in 2007, what was the diagnosis that we had? The diagnosis for those internal institutions, internal audit institutions. We saw a lack of coordination and collaboration between internal and external audits. Of course, that will involve code of accounts on a state and national level. So we see that the internal audit didn't have that dialogue with the external one. So there was a lot of repeated work. Sometimes we had a certain evaluation, a risk evaluation by the external audit without having consulted the internal audit, and then we had double work. We could have saved time, we could have saved resources and effort. Maybe an internal audit would have sufficed. The second point is that we've already talked about the overlap between those two activities by the internal and external activities. But in the internal audit, there were functions and responsibilities that were poorly defined. And so sometimes we work with the states in a first instance. We also have the municipalities, and we focus on the states. And the problem is that those states, they didn't have a well-defined definition or a legislation. Sometimes they worked with compliance, and some other states work with public purchase, with procurement, and etc. They never focused on a common sense. There was a lack of balance. So there was not a definition of that work. Sometimes there were states that didn't even have an internal audit. So our constitution in Brazil really demands the need for an internal control, and some states lacked that. There was a problem with communication, which was insufficient. There was low cooperation rates. The norms were not harmonized. There were no systems and tools that were which were common to all of the states, and there was also a lack of training. When we talk about auditing here in Brazil, when we have accountings, when we have financial courses, we talk a lot about external audits. Very little do we talk about internal audits. We never get into much detail. So we lack that. We saw that they lacked that. Those professionals lacked training. So then we came up with a conceptual report. So, okay, so this is the diagnosis that we have. We have a very, the internal audit in Brazil is very poorly developed. So what are we going to need? So by means of this concept note, the World Bank came into play with this support. We were drafted by CONACE. If you don't know it, this is our Council for Internal Control in Brazil. It's an institution that gathers all of the internal controls in Brazil on a state and municipal level. So CONACE sought us, telling us that they needed some support on how to develop internal audit in the federation. So the World Bank started identifying best practices on an international level, financing the trips of some of our representatives at CONACE to get to know other realities, to exchange experiences, and then we realized that the pattern or the standards that we had. What was the pattern that we had? Well, it was something that had been emitted by the internal auditing department, and then we came up with IACM, called Internal Audit Capability Model. This is what we came up with after this concept note. So we had this model that was established. And then this model would be adopted by the Brazilian Federation. Let me talk to you about this methodology. If I'm not careful, I could take too long. But here I would like to show you the most important point about the IACM. This is not a norm list. IACM is actually a standard. It's a status evaluation for the internal audit. So we don't deal with all internal controls. Our focus is internal audit. Having said that, it's not about norms. We don't see the procedures that an internal auditor has to follow in order to accomplish his work. All of those procedures are defined in other set of norms of the Institute of Internal Auditors. We call those IPPFs in English. So those procedures are found there. Those norms are the basis. They will tell us how to do the audit, and then IACM tells us how to evolve from that basis. So you see that IPPF is the basis, IACM is like the building upon that basis. And then we have 5 points, 5 levels, if you will. There is no 0 level. We start from number 1, which is the initial one, which involves a self-diagnosis. So what is that about? We have isolated initiatives amongst the internal auditors. Every controller's office will act in a different way with their own initiatives, with their own norms and regulations. So sometimes those are not going to be aligned to those of others. Those are isolated initiatives. So this is level 1. Then level 2, infrastructure. Here we start walking towards some sort of standardization. So we start working with comparability. We stop having individual initiatives, and then we start thinking about structure, something that will be more institutionalized. Number 3, integration. There you go. Right here, we talk about uniformity. So we have a uniform application of the practices. We know what the plans are when it comes to when conducting those audits. We have a well-designed cycle. Number 4 and 5, which are the more advanced ones. Number 4, management, is when we have an internal audit starts having an impact on the risk management. So we see that internal audit has an important role when it comes to risk mitigation and risk analysis in a certain institution. That is going to be very important for that institution to do their businesses. Number 5, optimization. It's when we have a continuous learning process and we start receiving subsidies, outsourced subsidies. We have an integrated management with all of the internal actors of that institutions, and then external actors start giving them feedback based on the transparency of the use of public resources. So each of those levels, in Portuguese we call them KPAs, which are indicators of development in internal audit. For example, for level 2, we have 10 KPAs that need to be attained in order to get to level 2. For example, institutionalize the internal audit plan. That's one of the KPAs. Coverage is also one of the points, one of the KPAs. How much can we go? How far can we go? So all of those indicators are they can be used for self-evaluation, and then when we have all of the KPAs attained, then we can grow progress in IACM. The World Bank in each country of the world has an important document called Country Partnership Framework, which is a plan on how the World Bank is going to act in that country. Sometimes it's going to last for 4 or 5 years, depending on the plan. And then all of the projects, the financing projects in that specific country needs to follow these directives, these guidelines that we call CPF, Country Partnership Framework. And for Brazil, the World Bank had an important role when it comes to internal audits, because we created an indicator inside this CPF, which is connected to the development of internal audit. So he had a basal line in 2023, where we saw 19 institutions in level 1 and only 1 institution in level 2. Think about that. And the goal for 2028, which is the end of CPF, is to have 13 institutions in level 3 and 7 in level 2 out of the 27 states of the Brazilian Federation. So that's the goal that we established. If we don't attain that goal, there is not a certain penalty, a specific penalty, but you have to justify why you didn't attain that goal. This is going to be taken into account for the next CPF cycle. So maybe we're going to need more audacious indicators due to the failure during the previous cycle. This is going to be very important for us. This is what really helped us with the progress of the internal audits in Brazil. This is a Brazil map, a map of Brazil with all of the federations. We see that 11%, 3 states, are in level 1, in level 3, or about to get there, about to prove that they've been able to attend or to fulfill the requirements. We have Roraima and Amapá, who are still in level 1. They still haven't worked with their self-diagnosis. They are very poorly developed. So we are still developing. We're still evolving. This is the most recent data about our states. And in 2007, it's important to remember that just 1 state of the Federation was part of level 2. So this is a remarkable evolution. We know that we've treaded difficult pathways. So what are the strengths of this coordination that is being done? the IACM, we see that we have a significant governance. When we have CANASI that puts together all of the states in Brazil, we have that exchange and experience. It's like an OLACEFS of the internal controls in Brazil. With this experience exchange, everyone sharing with one another about the implementation of those norms in their own regions, we see that they can share that in a certain forum. We have a technique committee. They can they have a technical committee, and they can discuss how they are implementing those norms. So we see that it's quite complex. We have 27 little countries in Brazil, yeah, the federations, the different states. Sometimes we work with several countries in one office in Latin America, but for Brazil, we have we have several offices because Brazil is quite well developed in some states. It's not very well developed in other states, so we need several offices to well determine the situation in Brazil. Such a continental country, isn't it? We always think about the lack of training for professionals, so we really need to mind that. Let's talk about the most important benefits. We started measuring. Right now, we have been working with. We're trying to measure the impact of what IACM is doing, and we're trying to see how that has impacted our savings when it comes to the use of public resources.
So the Federal Court of Accounts promoted a historical assessment as of 2012, looking at the resources and the fact that the actions of internal controls, what they reflected in economy for the public coffers. And in 2021 was exactly when the Federal Court of Accounts adopted the ICM standard and started applying it to its internal audits.
Mas isso demonstra que tem sim algum.
And we wanted to assess if there was an actual impact. So 32 billion reais, which is equivalent to about $6 billion, were the economy that was detected, the savings. And the better the internal audit procedures, the more efficient the preventive actions. And the more you're able to mitigate the risks of misapplying these resources, among others. In Santa Catarina, they promoted an evaluation in 2024 with the support of the World Bank through a consultancy, and they saw that over 348 million reais, or $66 million, were saved due to the adoption of this standard. And since 2019, when these standards were adopted, we had an increment in what has been detected and corrected. So conclusions. The first thing, this is a very complex and gradual process. As I mentioned, everything began in 2007. It's been over 10 years, almost 20 at this point, and the process is still ongoing. What really matters is that you begin implementation in a way that you achieve the results that I just presented as soon as possible. So this is a work that requires persistence, and we have been provided this support since 2007 here in Brazil. We also have cultural changes. We have to convince leadership, and this leadership is many times resistant to the actions of internal audits. We have to convince them to use multilateral institutions like the World Bank and others, so that it is a significant factor in adopting these measures. We have improvement in risk management. We have better transparency. We have more solid governance, and we have better relationships between institutions and countries. Addressing a bit of talking a bit of the importance of internal control on external control activities. External control looks at internal controls and establishes the levels of audits. I'm not the expert here, you are. But this is pretty much the way it works. And when you have very well developed internal controls, you narrow that scope or you redirect the external audit scope. And in Brazilian states, that has actually been happening. We have a few state counts of a courts of accounts that are focusing on the areas of greater risk. And why should I reassess this risk if the state's internal controllership has already done that? Because I'm going to look at those risks. I'm going to reevaluate new risks if needed, but I'm also going to direct my tests to the areas of greater risk. And you optimize the work. It is no longer purely operational. It is now more strategic. The second point is assessment of the risks and support in planning. So if you use things like AICM, if you use COSO, IPPF, these standards are also based many times on external audit standards like ISOs and etc. And you can match the compatibility of those standards. So those that were assessed, everything that was assessed in the internal audit would also be in the external audit. In terms of efficiency and quality, we have international standards that are being complied with. So you bring down the number of duplicities and also the costs. And finally, the strategic benefits. This is a constant struggle between control institutions against fraud and corruption, which is debated with frequency within the World Bank, since we're talking about financial resources. So when you have very well developed audit standards, you're able to detect fraud and corruption in, let's see, you can detect them a lot earlier. Therefore, you're promoting efficiency. You're not waiting for the resource to be applied in a wrong or poor way. You are acting preventively, or at least concomitantly to the fact. And that was something that was addressed in prior panels incessively. And I thank you for your attention. This is my contact information. We have Joseph Quizito. He is the practices manager for the region. Lourdes Loza, and I am Leonardo Nascimento here from Brazil. I thank you very much, and I wish you a wonderful afternoon. We thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, we will now take our lunch break. And we invite all of you to join us at the Blue Night Restaurant. We will return to our activities at 2 o'clock with the official launch of the Sustainable Initiative of OLACEFS.